Bakunin, much earlier, had predicted all of this. He said that in the future, it'll be two forms. One form will be they'll take over the state, and they'll create a red bureaucracy, which will be the most vile and brutal regime the world's ever seen. And there are others who will understand that they can't take over the state, so they have to serve concentrated private power and state power. And they'll be the technical intelligentsia who, implement the policies of the masters in what we now call liberal democracies, which is a very good prediction. It's one of the few predictions in the social sciences that actually came true, which is one of the reasons why nobody ever studies it. It's much too dangerous and too insightful.
In both the Soviet Union and the United States, ruling elites would set out to master the psyche of the average worker, and from the Hawthorne experiments came new insights. Researchers found that the very act of allowing workers to talk about their feelings reduced the possibility of agitation and rebellion. It made workers feel as if they mattered, even if the social relations remained fundamentally the same.
The Hawthorne experiments, initially it was to be a purely scientific study, and science tries to get rid of unnecessary things. Let's make everything equal so there aren't any other factors than the ones we're controlling for. So they were trying to see what effect changing the lighting would have on how workers felt and also how much they produced. There wasn't any really quality concern, but quantity of production and worker satisfaction, which will ultimately affect the quantity of work as well. But to do that, they said, well, we don't want to have employees being disgruntled about this and that being a factor. So we will discuss with the employees what we are going to do. There were complete discussions, and the employees would suggest trying this and trying that. And what they found was, no matter what changes they made, including putting the lighting back to where it had been before the experiment began, to see what difference that made. Every time they made a change, having discussed it with employees, production went up, and employee satisfaction went up. Now, if it had been done in a democratic context, immediately the reaction would have been, let's look at the participation. But this was done in a hierarchical context. So what came out of it was a public relations school, industrial relations developed out of it. And most of that was taken as a way of trying to control employees by trying to manipulate them ideologically. Not that managers hadn't done that before, but now there was a whole school of doing that. I would say the wrong lesson was learned. Yeah, put out a suggestion box so that employees can feel they're being asked, but you don't necessarily pay any attention to it. In a real teamwork organization or a participatory organization, employees get to take each other into account. They begin caring about each other. I've seen this going into a plant and seeing it develop over time, the amount of participation increase, and the attitudes of employees begin to grow, and the care that people have about each other. And then that can easily expand to care about the community. And also work can be reorganized because people have a say. There are better ways to do things. If we are treated better, we'll work better, and so forth. Now, the broader social impact of doing these kinds of things, as we've seen earlier, hierarchical control makes people feel worse about themselves. It creates more mental illness, creates bad relations outside the workplace. Well, if people spend most of their time in a collaborative workplace, they become more collaborative. They care more about each other. You can have a democratic corporation, a worker-owned business, and a worker-owned business that really is managed by the workers, that uses the corporate form. And that gives us some hope because it's possible, at least theoretically, to reform corporations.
Participatory economics is the name for a different way to do the economy. It's a different approach to accomplishing production, consumption, and allocation, economic functions, different than what? Different than capitalism, and different than what went under the name socialism, but I tried to describe as coordinatorism, as this class of of engineers and managers and doctors and lawyers being at the top. So participatory economics, or paricon, is an alternative to all of that. It's a different kind of economy. In a participatory economy, in a good economy, instead of organizing economic life to keep a small sector of people on top and to enrich them beyond any sensibility, and to utilize productive apparatus even when it entails doing things that are a complete waste of time, building missiles that'll never be used, and on and on and on. Instead of all that, we would produce and distribute for purposes of human fulfillment and development. You don't need all the advertising, you need sensible information, rather than people competing with advertising that has nothing to do with actually communicating what the benefits and costs of production are. You don't need all this military production, of course not. You don't need, nor do you want to, generate all kinds of activity and product which doesn't make people better off.
As workers around the globe continue to struggle for workplace democracy and equal rights, mass production continues apace. Taylorism combined with human relations make up the cornerstones of worker management in the 21st century. In China, scientific management has taken on nightmarish proportions. So extensive is the division of labor that millions of people are forced to perform roughly the same motion thousands of times a day. In the United States, workers in some assembly plants are required to be in continual motion for up to 57 seconds a minute. In Indonesia, sweatshops owned by corporations like Nike chart productivity down to 1,000th of a second. In offices and service industries, corporations are increasingly resorting to video surveillance and computerized monitoring.